Hello and welcome to my presentation on educational philosophies. I will be sharing insight into the truth of education and looking into breaking down a number of philosophies used before. These past philosophies include, but are not limited to, idealism, existentialism, realism, and perennialism. My personal education philosophy is one which is built on equity and has foundation in the Word of God. This enlightenment is therefore not created with any bias or prejudice and is created on true equity. If we are reasonable about this, we know equity is necessary for the provision of a solution, and this solution cannot be provided from a place of inequity. This law is very universal and visible in all of our sciences. The truth is whole, always has existed, and cannot be created by any divided perspective, the same way that we cannot integralize a derived scenario without having information go missing. Now, following a philosophy where we are as individuals to seek true enlightenment and awareness will create a world of billions of individuals who exist at a higher conscious level with the ability to see more and think before a conscious trigger, inequity, or prejudice kicks in. It is very humbling to understand that these triggers, prejudices, or inequities only serve to satisfy one's mind, yet they create divide. As spoken by God through Isaiah, man does not see because of his inequities. It is also very humbling to admit that the world of gross inequity as we see it today is simply a product of lifetimes of inequity and fear. This understanding is too an extremely empowering one at the same time. These triggers that kick in are what we see as a cage-like structure inside of the frontal lobe cortex of man. This is the same piece of the brain which science tells us controls the personality of an individual. Humility, or the ability to think in a manner which is not controlled by one's own prejudice or self-righteousness, we now see is far more than just a philosophy. We can tell that man still exists in a place of inequity, as it is still unsure of the best way to go forwards, and therefore has not found purity, as it still counts on its own ability to solve from its own perspective as something that exists. Mankind is therefore not yet truly humble, but in a state of self-justification. When comparing this holy thinking with the past philosophies of reality, we can take, for example, idealism and perennialism, both of which have understood that the truth exists and is whole and unchanging. Plato's understanding speaks of the idea of truth being latently and subconsciously existent in the soul of mankind, and said this therefore gives man the arduous task of remembering what he once knew. Although this epistemology is humiliating in understanding that the distractions of the material world and therefore our own understanding is what separates us from true knowledge, its fault in missing the presence of the whole and the mighty paints the true journey of upliftment and enlightenment as an arduous task of memory. My method of truth that I share is one that follows true enlightenment, the holy truth. Personally, my core values seek a striving to always be better than I was before. The best technique for this is the application of humility and the holy word. One should first seek the kingdom of truth, which exists inside of oneself. He will have to deny his own mentally satisfying conviction on a daily basis if he is to be found worthy of the truth, and shall seek to please God, making his word an action. He should also not seek to perform any deeds with the idea of being seen by another man if he is to truly profit and raise his consciousness, vibration, or spiritual level. If we do our deeds in order to be seen and noticed by our peers, our profit will be absorbed into our ego, and we will not rise in conscious level. We know the opinion of others is often the falseness that sways our choices. This is something we need to avoid, and instead stay true to the word, for God is his word. It is understandable that man has somewhat of a mental conundrum when trying to justify to himself that within the text can exist the holy truth. But as he has come to this conclusion, and therefore by his own standings, he is therefore able to be humble enough to know that it is only his own understanding that stops his faith in the word. As we come to know God through the word, we will undergo a conscious reprogramming and subconscious reprogramming and the clearing of all the barbs, planks, and false truths which exist as self-justifications. These will be ridded of, and will allow humanity a growth in consciousness or enlightenment. Another core value associated with this is to work tooth and nail, to work hard, so that the talents and abilities that one possesses as an individual will flourish and blossom when one's soul has been alleviated of its inequity. Humility applied with working tooth and nail is a very sure way of progression, as we are seeking correction by the word rather than to justify ourselves as correct. Remember, if what we once thought to be true was in actual fact true, it would still be true whether we had justified it as true or not. Otherwise, if what we previously thought of as true was in fact found to be false, one is left in a position of mental hardship where he has to learn to be humble enough to admit his fault, or otherwise he creates a place of self-justification and arrogance which is blinding. We can now see that one's prejudices are therefore futile. We may already now see why man is told not to lean on his own understanding and to build his foundation of self on the rock of truth that is the Word. Let's take a look at how taking the enlightenment of the Word manifests in teaching practice. One of the first things that we will begin to notice in the classroom and everywhere else that the Word is applied is an increase in thinking capacity of the individual. This as individuals are more humble and therefore have more space to think. If we can look at what intelligence means, we'll see that it closely relates to the number of steps that someone can take in their mind before losing their way, as well as the ability of one's to process new information and not to try to fit it into its own current level of consciousness, to be humble. In the modern day classroom, this will reap benefits and progress in all subjects. We can look at mathematics to start with, which has its whole foundation built upon the use of the equal sign, or equity, where the left-hand side is equal to the right-hand side. We know that without this key feature, we cannot provide a solution to a problem. Being an individual who exists closer to equity, and in the future without any inequity, logically increases the ability of an individual to solve. We will see the ability of humans to process mentally increase, and without the skew defining inequities which were once held as an individual would trap his mind's ability. We too shall see an increase in creative ability, as an individual with a greater ability to imagine and visualize will produce better product. This will be produced in the art classroom too, as individuals unlock greater potential within themselves. Linguistics too become easier to tackle, to learn, and to grow one's ability in, as the mind understands how different languages work in different shapes of consciousness and conscious connection, and rather that than as a process where we are to memorize and regurgitate language. Other subjects like those that branch from mathematics, including the science of physics and chemistry, will also be better understood by every individual, as due to the better grasping and closer existence to what is called mathematical equity, but actually means equity as a wholeness, overall increases our ability to solve as individuals. Now, these are just the stats on a few cap stats on a lesson that was used in an assignment in 4.1. Here we look at the ethical dilemma of school uniforms in a progressivist classroom. This dilemma again is largely born out of inequity and presents itself in uniforms or even a lack thereof. A school uniform is a way of keeping clothing somewhat off the minds of young learners. In theory, this is a fair thing, as it means less to worry about for an already busy-minded learner. Uniforms can also wear the unintentional or intentional mask, which is seen by the covering up of imbalances in wealth, importance of clothing, and fashion sense of individuals. This means that any discrepancies in quality or newness of civilian clothing between learners is not seen, and clothing is not at all seen as an indicator. If the discrepancy in the above factors of clothing is seen as an indicator and uniform is not worn by students, This type of indicator can be used as a method to try to ensure that a basic need of purpose-serving clothing is had by all. A true progressivist classroom would either not mask these discrepancies and instead would seek to use them as some kind of indicator to take care of those in need by those with surplus, or it would ensure all learners have neat and good condition uniform to wear because the focus of schooling is education, which seeks to correct imbalances in the long run through education and not by the clothing of learners. The ethical dilemma of special treatment in a progressivist classroom. In a classroom of many different learners, all with different selves, the dilemma of special treatment or favoritism is one that can arise and may seem even justifiable. This special treatment may be down to familiar relation through relatives, the interests of the learner, or even the willingness to learn or listen of the learner, as well as a number of different factors. A progressivist classroom sees ongoing growth and development as key progress markers and understands that all learners are different individuals. This allows a teacher not to expect exactly the same product from every learner, but still to treat all learners equally. This understanding therefore allows different learners to be treated differently yet equally. It does this by assisting each learner in a manner which helps them to develop as an individual. Key activities for this include class discussions and strong elicitation by teachers to the most necessary learners primarily. Now, mainly because a learner-centered classroom is one where the focus is shared by both the teacher and the learners, I stand in favor of the learner-centered classroom. This classroom style uses a teacher as more of a coach and a facilitator than a fact sharer, and allows the student to collaboratively and expressively partake in their own creation of knowledge in the subject area taught with the guidance of the teacher. This means that there will be thinking structures in place for a learner that give him reasoning and helps him to answer the question of why and not just what. Not only does this help retention, but it also gives the learner the ability to change variables in the area of knowledge and come to reasonable answers. For me, this is preferred over a classroom model where the interpretation of knowledge is down to the learner, and he will likely only have his or her own previously held thinking structures in place, as well as what may have been correctly interpreted by the learner in the teacher-centered classroom. So in this slide, we are going to look at the application of the Holmes 4-step guide to moral dilemma. And here is the scenario. So it is nearing examination time at local high school. Local high school exists in an area previously filled with wealthy students of European heritage, and in more recent years, the heritage of the learners is far more mixed, covering all races in a proportion similar to the demographics portrayed by the nation as a whole. The dilemma comes in where Frankie, a grade 9 learner aged 15 years old at LHS, has noticed some peculiar behavior between his best friend, Rourke, also a grade 9 learner but of 18 years old, and their natural sciences teacher, Miss Needs. Over the past few months, Rourke has been missing break times, seemingly at random, and has been staying behind after school to help Miss Needs in the lab. More recently, Rourke asked Frankie to keep a secret. Rourke had been caught by Frankie and another 2 fellow students on a trip back from the liquor store to the school. He was carrying the same promotional bottles of beer that Frankie had noted very strange to encounter in Miss Needs' classroom trash can. Yesterday, Rourke approached Frankie and came clean to his friend, spilling the beans. He said that himself and Miss Needs had been meeting up on the regular for a good time and told Frankie that he must tell nobody else, or else their friendship would be over and Miss Needs would lose her job. Rourke also said that Miss Needs has been caught in this position before. Frankie now faces a moral dilemma. Should he keep quiet, keep his friendship and not risk Miss Needs' job security? Or should he speak to his parents or the school principal and have the potential issue addressed? Now, the scenarios in the mentioned situation include an affair between a learner and a student, as well as the potential drinking of alcohol by the 2 parties in the affair at school. The members at risk of losing dignity include Miss Needs, Frankie, and the school. The liberty of Frankie has also been disrupted as he now has a barrier to his freedom of expression. This by Rourke using their friendship as a collateral to assure Frankie's secrecy. Frankie faces a dilemma of truth versus loyalty. The second stage looks at the moral judgment of what is morally wrong and what is morally right. We need to establish whether there has been any unfair treatment of any member involved, as well as whether the actions would be accepted by the community and if the actions contravene any moral standard. To do this, we can look at the potential outcomes, losses and/or gains of the parties involved, as well as the probability that these losses occur. There are two issues at hand. Number one, the teacher-learner relationship, and number two, the consumption of alcohol by a minor during school hours on school premises. The purpose of schooling is educational, both theoretical and social. Does the affair and the alcohol consumption at all affect this? Is another question we can ask. Looking further, Frankie can choose whether he wants to remain silent or whether he wants to share the information he knows. Frankie knows that the community will not approve of the events, but is also aware that the relationship has nothing to do with the general public, and that his friend made the decision to be with the teacher, and likewise the teacher with the friend, as compos mentis, aware and consenting individuals. Here we look at moral intention, and we will continue to focus on Frankie as the moral administrator in this scenario. Frankie is a person who has the best outcomes for all in mind. He doesn't want Miss Needs' position to come into jeopardy, as he feels she is an excellent teacher, and the quality of her lessons has been in no way affected by the affair. Frankie is also not really fazed by the threat to his friendship with Rourke, and it is more important for him to make a fair and morally correct decision. He therefore is strongly considering to remain silent, as he does not feel it is his place to be involved, and instead he wants to talk to his friend openly about the issue. Frankie thinks that the biggest issue may be the alcohol consumption, which he assumes took place in Miss Needs' classroom. So, after considering all options and realizing that there is no gain to be had by any party if he decides to take the information further, Frankie decides to keep the information that he has become aware of about his friend and his science teacher's time spent together as something between him and his friend. He also remembers that the law of God says, "Let he that is without sin cast the first stone," and Frankie feels this should not be him. He overall is very happy with his choice, as he has considered all parties involved and sees no benefit for any party if he decides to share this private information, and sees that it would only animate a lot of people in what should stay a private matter between consenting, conscientious adults. So on that sweet note, I would like to say thank you very much for taking the time to watch this presentation, and I trust that the information shared within will do the right thing, and will make the necessary steps that we are all seeking on the journey to enlightenment. Thank you very much. I'm Joel. Bye-bye.